Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to Microsoft Project for Beginners. This is lesson 7, and in this lesson we're going to be doing tracking, updating, and monitoring in Microsoft Project. If you want to watch previous videos in this series, you can look in my description or you can click subscribe. You can look at my playlists on my YouTube channel and you'll see Microsoft Project for Beginners. And under that playlist, you'll find from lesson 1 right up till now. And we start out purely from the beginning in this series. I do have other series that are more advanced in Microsoft Project, and you can see the number of videos that I have on those playlists. So I'm going to review what we did last time, and then we're going to add some things such as how do we track the actual different versions in Microsoft Project. And I'm going to use what I call the file naming protocol method. For that, which is used very frequently in projects where you have a lot of updates that you have to do and you want to have a good solid record of what's happened on your project. But let's keep things simple. We have this series of tasks, and you can freeze your screen if you don't have this. I have, in this particular example, resources added with costs. You don't have to have that if you're not doing a resource or cost loaded schedule. But I will give you a quick overview of that as well, and I do go through that in my previous videos. But if you freeze your screen and you just sort of type these in and follow along, that's very helpful. And just a reminder, you can pull this bar to the side. You can see the resource names, predecessors that have been applied. You switch screens. Typically, I switch screens by clicking the square icon box, right-clicking. So I'm currently in the entry view. That has a series of screens, so today we'll be looking at the variant screen and we will be looking at the tracking screen. Slide to the left, all the way to the left, and you right click and you go down the resource sheet. This I created just to simply be able to add a bunch of resources to my project. Again, you could freeze your screen and copy these in. If you don't know what I mean by resources, you could go back to one of the earlier videos on my playlist on resource, and I'll have a listing also in the description below that you can also use to go to those links. So I'm going to slide back now and I'm going to go to the Gantt chart, and I'm going to do a quick look at what did I actually apply as far as resources to the various activities. And usually, again, I click on the resource tab, go to assign resources. And what I've done, besides create these tasks and these durations and the summary task here, I've added resources. So for example, in summary task, I've added the PM 50%, and that's basically taking the PM that they're going to be working 13 days overall, 50% of the time. And at the cost that I used in the other screen, it's added that up or multiplied that out. Of course, the site super I've got assigned 100%, so they're going to cost twice as much. I'm paying them the same amount, so that's why that is. Here I've added the drywall sub and drywall supplier, and I put 10,000 square feet of drywall at 50 cents a square foot, which was in the resource sheet, and so on and so forth. I've added the plumber, $4,000. I've added laborers, 2 laborers, 1 laborer here, 1 laborer there so far, right? So that's what I've added to this particular example. So pretty easy. You can catch up if you want to, or you can just follow along and get the gist of it. All right. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to update my schedule. Now you do see a critical path through here. So we've talked about this before. The critical path is the longest path through the project. So all those activities that are red, they're critical. If yours doesn't show that, you can always show it by going to the format screen and clicking the little square box here, right? So that's critical tasks. Okay, so we've got that lit up. Sometimes this disappears, by the way, if you pick dates through here, which is constraints, and I'd advise against that. But again, you can go back to earlier videos and get more information on what a constraint is. That'd probably be in video 1 and 2. All right, so we're going to update this schedule. So to update a schedule, what you have to do is insert a status date. Status date is the date that you're updating the schedule to. And so in this particular case, I'm going to put a status date, let's see, down through here. So at this date, this Friday, so that's going to be in the first week of February here. So let's see how we do that. We go to the Project tab. we go to where it says status date over here, and we can insert the status date. But before we insert the status date, which is the date we're going to update the schedule to, we have to also tell Microsoft Project, you know what? I want you to remember all this. I don't want you to forget this. So very important, before we do that, if we haven't already done it, we go and we set the baseline. Setting the baseline takes a photo image, or really a digital image, of a number of cells, and Microsoft Project will remember them. For example, if I go to my cost screen, click the square icon box and right click your mouse, that's what I always do, shortcut, and you will see all of your costs. But right now you see baseline 0. Well, what Microsoft Project would do is it would copy and paste all these costs over here, like digitally it would do that, right? And that means that whenever you make a change, you can always see and compare what's the change impact compared to the baseline. So then after that, it will show you a variance once you've set the baseline. The other area that it does this in, if you slide down, you go to variance, it sets a baseline here for baseline start, baseline finish. So when dates change, it will show you the variance and basically the difference between what you've changed and what you planned. And that'll say the number of days. So essentially with Microsoft Project, you can have comparisons in cost and comparisons in time, which can be very, very helpful for you in tracking your projects. Because when we think about project management, we think about time, cost, quality, right? And how they interact with each other. So this is what we're trying to do to effectively manage our projects. All right, so let's do that. Let's go set baseline. Set baseline. And you know, you can do it for an interim plan. You can save up to 11 baselines in Microsoft Project, and that's for another session down the road. I'll talk about how you can have differing baselines, and I have talked about that in my Microsoft Project Made Easy playlist. So if that's something that you really want to jump ahead to, you could look at my Microsoft Project Made Easy playlist and look for baselines, and you'll see that. But I prefer to update the schedule and save different iterations using a file naming protocol, which is very useful. My background, I'm a professor of construction management and large construction projects. Number one, we have a lot more than 11 updates that we do typically. You know, construction projects can run many, many months over years, and 11 isn't going to be enough to cut it. And there's a lot of jumbling around that you have to do in between. So we generally create a baseline and we stick to it unless there's some major change. And then if there is some major change at that point, we might re-baseline the schedule. For now, I just want to baseline the entire project. So stick to the default. So I'm going to click OK, and you should see the baseline. It won't say NA anymore in the variance screen. Now you know you've saved the baseline. Very important. There's no point in updating a schedule if you haven't set the baseline, because you have then nothing to compare to. This is a problem that I find a lot of new users do, is they forget to set the baseline, and then it's like, but how did it change? I can't remember how much it changed. This will tell you this way. Okay. You could also go back to set baseline, and it will tell you that it was saved. So you know it was saved. And once you've saved it, you don't have to go back and do that generally. When you get more advanced, you may have to re-baseline the schedule, or you may choose the multiple baseline approach. Okay. So for now, we've got this nice baseline set, and it also did a baseline on the cost. Remember, there was 0 here. Now all of these costs are over here as well. And right now we have 0 variance. Great. That'll change as we update the schedule, however. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that status date. I'm under the project tab, status date. Click on that, and I'm going to pick when I want to update the schedule to. So I'm actually going to go a little bit back in time from where I am now, but let's see. What did I say? February 4th, so let's go February 4th. Okay, so I pick February 4th, click OK, and nothing happens. Except I do see February 4th, 2022 up here. And if I went to my project information box, I would see February 4th here as well. Sometimes I find some versions of Microsoft Project can get a little bit buggy and it might not give you the right year here. So just watch for that. If you ever run into that as a problem, just do it inside here. So I went to project information, do it here. Does the same thing, status date. There's always more than one way to do things in Microsoft Project. So if you're familiar with it or comfortable with a different way and it works for you, that's great. I tend to not like to do it here with students because I find that for whatever the reason they mix up status date and start date. So I don't do it here. I usually do it over here. All right, so we've got February 4th, 2022. I'm going to hover in this blank area and I'm going to right click and I'm going to put in this blank area where it says grid lines. So I right click my mouse, it brings up that box and I'm going to pull down here because I'd like to see the status date. All right, and I'm going to put a solid line. And I'm going to say I'd like to see it red. And this is kind of what I did in the previous video. You know, I showed people how to update here. And so it's kind of a little bit of a review and gets you really sort of the material sticking if you have been following along. All right, so that means that we're going to update everything to the left of the status date. And I kind of said before as well, you know, when you're updating, it's everything that's happened between the last update and this update, right? Because you're going to do this multiple times on a bigger project, right? So what has happened in the last 3 weeks on this project? Well, to do that, I should do my updating in a different table. And this is where switching tables, you got to get used to it. Click the square icon and go to the tracking screen. All right, so this is where I can put in actual starts and actual finish dates. You know, if I hover here, I can see what the, well, typically I can see it. Let's see. If I hover here, I can see what the start date was going to be on January 17th. Did we start on January 17th, right? I could pull this down and say, yes, we did start on January 17th. So I could click there, and it's basically saying we did start there. Usually when I'm in this screen, like I could now go and say the actual finish date that we finished. Now it looks like that we were supposed to finish that on January 18th, which would have been the end of the Tuesday, but I'm going to say the 19th. All right. And when we do that, it pushes things and it pushes everything, right? It pushes out everything. That's because we have everything linked. I spent a lot of time in one of the earlier videos discussing why you want to have everything linked so that you can see the impacts when something changes, right? So this is how this is impacting potentially the rest of the project unless you do something about that. That'll be an upcoming video. What do we do about it? How do we recover the time to get it back? And so I'll give you a little bit of heads up on that today. The next thing, we got to update the next activity. You know, what happened with the next activity? And a lot of times too, you know what I very often will do is I will insert a column called duration, D. So if you know the first letter of it, D, type it and go to duration. So just to go back on that, there's my duration column. I took it from another screen. I can delete it from view. All I did was right click, insert column, type D for duration, go to duration, and there it is. All right, I sometimes like to have that, well, I most of the time like to have that in this screen, so I can see what the duration is. And there are so many columns in Microsoft Project, it's helpful to know a number of them. I don't think anybody ever uses all of them. There's another column actually, insert column, if I type B, and see all these baseline numbers? If you had multiple baselines, these are the columns that it actually copies over. So when I set the baseline, it copied all of these columns here, right? So all of these columns it remembers. So it can always measure against these, I think it's 14 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 columns. So there's 14 columns that it remembers when you set that baseline. So that means you could always compare to any one of those columns if you wanted to. Like I could see what was the original. So I can see the original was 2 days and we changed it to 3 days, right? Which is handy. Sometimes I don't usually put that one there, but sometimes I do want to review it and I'll do that. Just to go back though, I'll get that duration column back there. I'll click undo and again, you can do that. All right. So let's say that task number 2 went as planned, like went as planned after this moved it, right? Or I could say, you know what, even though this started a day late, I could say that we were still able to start this one a day early. We decided that we could actually start this on the 19th, right? So I could say that we started this one on the 19th, right? It didn't push it totally like that, and that it got completed. So I could say it's 100% complete. That's what's handy about this. You can just click on that 100%, or you could just type in 100 in over here. All right. Now the plumbing activity, I'm going to say that we know that it took 2 days longer to complete. So I would probably just look at that and see how it pushed that out. And you know what? I'm going to say that this activity here, task number 5 here, so task number 2, it started a day early that the plumber was working on. Task number 5 here, that I've kept the names fairly simple for, I'm going to say, you know what, did not even start yet, and I'm going to move it. So I'm going to move this task, and because it's critical, it's going to impact the overall schedule. You'll see that later on. So I'm going to go move, and I could move it 1 day, I could move it 1 week, 4 weeks, or I could custom. And in custom, you can move it as many days as you want, specifically. Or I could just say incomplete parts to the status date. So this should move everything to the Monday. Remember, Saturday and Sunday are shown as non-working. So it moves them to the Monday. All right? And now I'm going to say, you know what? The rest of this stuff, it went as scheduled. So the rest of this stuff, it went as scheduled. So I'm going to, at this point now, I'm just going to select everything. All right, I'm going to select everything. Oh, by the way, I think it's important for you to notice that when I push that over there, this, which was red and on the critical path, stopped being red. So it's important to know that when I did that, it put a constraint. It put a constraint. So if I go back to the entry screen, I should see a constraint there. When you put a constraint, like when you pick a date and you move something, it puts a constraint to say that, you know, this is started then. So then it's not going to show this anymore critical. It's going to show that's out of critical. And very often when you have a constraint, like has a start no earlier than, it doesn't, at that point, it doesn't matter if this is done faster. My project won't be done faster because you're saying you didn't start this till here and it's on the critical path. So it kind of shut off the critical path before there. So if you wonder why a critical path disappears, it's probably because you put the constraint on it. Microsoft Project is saying, hey, this activity is no longer fully critical. Like if you move it up, it's not going to show or move what's ahead of it because it's locked in because it has a constraint on it. So you have to be kind of careful to minimize constraints. The only reason I try to avoid constraints wherever possible, but something like this, you know, the status date, that means it's got to be this date. I'm not updating the schedule into the future. I'm already at Friday night, and I know that this task is starting on Monday morning. I've moved it to start there. I haven't said that it has done any work yet, but I've moved it to start there. All right. So now that I know that information, and that, in this case, it was okay to move that to there and to put a constraint on there because I know it can't start any earlier than that because we're already at this date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. In this case, that's why I don't mind having a constraint there. And then I'm just going to go up here, this mark on track, which is really a cool tool. If you get into the updating process, I want all of these to be updated. Now, if I went back to my tracking screen, I could look at these and I could, you know, I could type in 100% and I could look at this one here, task 4, and I could say, all right, this is 2 days here and 2 days there, so it's 50% complete. And then I could look at this one, okay, this one here is 8 days long and it's 2 days is done of it, so it's 25% complete, and I could do all that. But instead I could, if this is the way that the project is flowing and this is where they're at, I could quite simply select everything and then I could just go mark on track and now it's up to date. And like I said, 50% done, 25% done. It's done the math for me. So that makes things a lot more simpler. Great. So I've done my update. And by the way, while I'm doing my update, that's everything in history. That's what has happened in the past, right? So this is historical. This should have happened, right? Everything to the right here is stuff we're going to look at for the future. How do we get that time back? But in this class, we're just looking at, or lesson, tutorial, whatever you want to call it, we're just looking at the updating process. So what we're trying to do is see what happened and understand what happened. So I really don't know fully. I've got things up to date, but I'm not sure how things are delayed. So to get a better sense of that, I have to slide to the left, go to my tracking screen and the tracking Gantt view. There's different ways of doing this. You could go in here and you could go to format and you could go to show me the baseline, and it will do that, right? So if I go here, it shows me the baseline. So I could do that there, and it kind of just darkens in. And wherever you see this dark line, that's the baseline. And then this is what it's extending outward. Or you could also say, show me slippage for the baseline, and not the baseline. So show me slippage, right? Oops, I think I shut it off there. So that's the amount that the project is slipping, right? That's where these activities should be. This is where they're slipping, all right? I generally don't do it that way. What I usually do is I go straight to the actual tracking Gantt, which slide to the left, right click your mouse, go down, select tracking Gantt, and I kind of like this view better. All right. I can see where the status date is supposed to be, but it doesn't show me the status date line in this view. I'm going to make my text bigger so you can see it a little bit better in this tracking view. If you ever want to make your text bigger, just go Format, Text Styles. I'm going to make it 14. That should be big enough. Okay. You do lose a little bit of real estate on the Gantt chart when you do that, but at least everything's a little bit bigger. Depends on your screen, right? All right, so we got this tracking screen, and I can't see my status date, but I can tell by how it's darkened that it's here, right? I've updated to this line here, but I'd like to see it. So again, once you insert it on this screen, then when you flip back and forth, you should see it in both. So I right-click my mouse in the Gantt chart area, grid lines, pull this down like we did before, status date, pick solid line. I'm going to pick red, click OK. There it is. Okay, so there is my status date. And I'm going to go to the variance screen. It's good to use the Gantt chart and the actual tables in combination visually. So variance, I can see my start and finish variance numbers, and I can visually see them as well. And if you're not showing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, remember in the bottom right behind my picture, there's a minus and plus sign down there. And you can click on the minus and plus sign to zoom in or zoom out. Or another quick way that you can also do that is go to View, and you can say, show me this in days, right? And that'll quickly zoom it to days. Sometimes it's maybe a little bit stretched out, you know, the size between the days. And as I've said before, you double click here and you can, that brings up the timescale box, and you can do all kinds of customizations. But the one I like the best is just shrinking the size so I can see more on my screen at once what's going on. Okay, so I can visually see we started on time, no variance. We finished this activity 1 day late. This activity had no start variance and no finish variance because it actually was able to pull back a day, right? So whoever was on the project saw what was going on, but they pulled that one back, so they actually were able to start earlier. All right, then this one here took an extra 2 days. So there is 2 days. So what you should really do, ask yourself, why is this delayed by 2 days? Why is task 3 delayed by two days? And put a note. You know, task 3 delayed due to bad weather. right? You can put whatever that is going on with task 3, but that way you're documenting what's going on. And this is very helpful on projects, construction projects. Everybody wants to point the finger on who caused the delay and different things like that. You want to track this stuff because it could potentially mean that you have relief. But even if it's not that type of project where you're worried about that, you want to track it so that you understand what's going on. Maybe you do a similar project in the future. You'll have all that data there that you can look into so that when you're trying to plan out the next project, or maybe you have another phase to this project so you can make improvements and you don't keep making the same mistake over and over. That's what we're trying to do. Essentially, we want to be more efficient at running our projects. All right, so we've done that. And we see that we are delayed, and we can very clearly see where we've been delayed, right? So this just carried the delay, but this one added another 2 days, and it's critical, right? So we can follow that these were critical, this is critical, and that this has delayed us by 4 days, following through the critical path, 4 days, right? Right to the end. And that is where we're at. And then we would know why actually this other task was delayed a further 2 days. It wasn't delayed 4 days, it was delayed a further 2 days. It was pushed by 2 days. And perhaps it was because this individual did not get finished. They took an extra 2 days, and maybe this individual started something else, and then they couldn't come back when you wanted them to do that specific bit of work. So that's giving you a good idea on how that actually gets saved and updated in your project. Now, there is something else that I wanted to talk about is, well, how do we save these files and know what's going on? Because the next steps that we're going to do in future videos, we're going to do recoveries, like how do we get the time back? That's another thing that we've got to think about. Well, this stuff's delayed us. The whole point in scheduling is not that everything goes exactly as scheduled, because it never does. There's always something that comes up. But it's like as you go a little bit off track, how do you get it back on track? How do you keep your project going towards your end goals, right? If we want to use a Marvel Comics word, end game, like what are you trying to accomplish here? Where are you trying to finish up? And most projects have a finish date. They have a budget, and you're trying to keep within the finish date, and you're trying to keep within the budget. By the way, we just did these variances here. We're 4 days over. How are we doing cost-wise? Because this is a cost-loaded schedule. Not all schedules are cost-loaded, like I said, but this one is. Oh, we're $4,800 over. We're now costing $66,640 instead of $61,840. Why? These show zero variance. It's only on the top screen. Do you know why? Can you think about that? If we go to the entry screen and we pull this bar to the side, we can see resource names. By the way, I could have inserted that column in my cost screen. Sometimes I'll do that so I can see what's going on with particular trades. Oh, on the actual summary task here, we've assigned the site super and PM, like I said in the beginning. So they're working a fair amount of time now. I think in the beginning it was 26 days if I remember, so now it's 30 days because we're 4 days longer. Well, that means the site super and PM, they're working. The site super is working 4 days longer, and it looks like the PM's working 2 days longer. There's a cost associated with that. How much is that cost specifically? Well, again, we could see it over here that we have a variance of 4,800, and that's the only one, so that's coming off that. We could also see individually, if we slide to the left and right-click, go down to the resource sheet, we could see in the resource sheet the different resources, but there's this nice little trick up here. There's a square icon box over here. You right click and you can go to cost there. Site super. Oh, Site super is costing $3,200 more. All right. Unless I'm mistaken, let me see here, because I can't always remember all this stuff. $100 an hour for the site super. Nice even number. We can figure this out. So, site super is working 4 days longer. 8-hour days standard calendar. 4 times 8, 32 hours. 32 times $100, there's your 32 hours times 100, there's your $3,200. PM is working 50% of the time. 4 days, they're going to be there 2 days. 2 days, 16 hours. 2 times 8, 16 hours, times 100, $1,600. That's why you've got these two that are adding up to that $4,800. So I guess my point is, if you have really done a good job of creating a master schedule baseline, now you've got something that you can really benchmark and measure your cost against and your time against, which is really nice going forward. So last thing that I really wanted to just sort of touch on today, because we'll get into the recoveries the next videos coming up, which is again very important, right? It's not just I could be just telling you step, click, 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 like other YouTube videos do, but I think it's important to really understand what the software is giving you and what you can do with it on your own projects, right? That's what you really want to know. And then this is just a tool to accomplish that. So I'm just going to switch to PowerPoint now. I'm now in PowerPoint, and I've just created this MS Project file naming protocol for updating and recovery. And I'll show you this in upcoming videos as we go through more processes of updates and recoveries, because this is what it's all about, right? You create a master schedule so you can track how you're doing. Like we were 4 days behind, well, the next step will be, how do we get that time back, right? But if we keep doing it in the same schedule, we really don't have a total record of all the steps that happen. So it's nice to keep this separated out, and I call this a file naming protocol. So if we do an update, say we do an update once a month, right? A formal update. Very often if you have stakeholders, clients, you have to provide a formal report to them once a month on how you're doing. Internally, you may be doing weekly updates, you may be doing short-term planning schedules that feed into the master project schedule, which again, there's all kinds of different technologies being used with that in IT and construction. Scrum is, well, in construction is just starting to get used, Scrum, but it's been used in IT for a few decades, using agile methods. Lean construction, adopted from the lean manufacturing area, does a lot of short-term aspects with last planner system that feeds up into the master schedule, into the milestone schedule. So what we're trying to do here, though, with the master schedule, is we'd have the master schedule right off the top. That's the baseline. That we leave alone, we keep that one. And then what we do is we name that file that we just updated, right? The file that we just updated to, I think it was February 4th, 2022 as an example. We would name that. And usually again, you can come up with different sort of layouts for it, but I kind of wanted to have an example for you. And this is what I usually do with my clients and students. So I usually put a number, like 1. And this would be the first update in the project. And then you put the date. You put the job name. You put what the name of the project is, right? And what are you doing? I'm updating. I'm recovering. Or it's a narrative. We'll talk about narratives in another section. That's what you're trying to explain what happened in the project. So this just repeats itself. Update. Now in this case, maybe I just did an update and I wasn't behind schedule. Well, I don't have to do a recovery to get the time back if I'm on schedule. So we're good in that case. And then a narrative. So sometimes you have to do a recovery. Sometimes you don't if everything's running the way that you want. And sometimes you may have change orders, things that have changed on the project, and you want to see how this change impacts the rest of the project. So you should be able to save them at those points in time, at those status dates, so you can see what happened. So this will be telling us the history of the project. This is the history of that, what happened during that first 3 weeks that we just updated on the one we just did. This will be showing how you plan to fix the 4 days that you were delayed, right? And you would explain that in a narrative document, what delayed you and how you plan to get the time back. Well, this recovery becomes the new schedule that you're really following. You keep the baseline built into it because you would have brought it back to 0, but it becomes the new plan. So then the next time you do an update, you just rename this file and that becomes your update. And that would then show what has occurred over the next month. And that's the step-by-step process of iterations that happens in project management. If you're not tracking the project in steps as you're going and that you can look at what's happened at points in time, it's not giving you the full data of what you need to know. And this is a very helpful methodology for you to be able to track your projects effectively. So I'm just going to go back to Microsoft Project for a second. Okay, we're back in Microsoft Project and we are in that update. We've updated the project. We can see under, just to go over and finalize, we're in the tracking screen. We can see what's actually started, what's not, what's partly completed in here. It'll show us actual durations, right? And remaining durations, right? So what's left to do on some of these activities. So this one hasn't even started. That's why it's got 10 days. This one's 8 days long. We've done 2 of it. We've got 6 days left. And so you sort of see how that actual and remaining comes into play. I won't get into physical percent complete. That's usually used in earned value analysis. It's a difference between comparing to duration and physical, what has actually been complete. So we'll leave that for now. We don't need to worry about that. And of course, in the variance screen, what was going on here? It's the difference between the starts, and the baseline starts and the starts. All right, it's going to show you those variances, whether you're done something or not, whether you've completed something or not. It's going to show you those variances. So for example, this is a Thursday, this is a Tuesday. The difference between a Thursday and a Tuesday is 2 days, right? So it's just doing those calculations of those differences, the difference between the baseline starts and now the new starts and finishes, whether they're actually done or they've been replanned for those purposes. So that's what I wanted to cover today in the updating and tracking and monitoring process. Hopefully you're going to find that helpful. Again, if you really want to learn Microsoft Project from beginning to end, go through my playlists, take a look, start early on if you're new to Microsoft Project, or jump in where it makes sense. My advanced playlist in the Microsoft Project Made Easy, I think I've got about 35 or 40 videos that goes into pretty much every topic that you can imagine. Still adding to it though. So I'm Tom Stephenson. Again, help us build this community and click subscribe, the notifications, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.